pervaded the walls of the sanctuaries of our missionary Baptist church for over 150 years. But yet, this much of documentation, this much of things are actually written, that we actually can go and find in our database system, which is why I chose this particular topic as my dissertation. So our topic on today, the Dr. Watts hymn lining tradition, a contribution to the African American Missionary Baptist Church. And again, we will not do a lecture on my dissertation, but just taking a small component for some of my research that I've conducted. So back during the years that I completed, after I completed my PhD studies at the University of Mississippi, my advisor, Dr. Alan Spurgeon, he said, Kelvin, I want you to do something ethnic. And so I was saying, ethnic? What is Doc getting at right here, ethnic? And it kind of hit me that he basically wanted me to do something that would serve as a contribution to my African-American heritage. So I remember maybe, fast forward maybe 3 years later, I was sitting at home in my home church in Mount Olive, in Mount Bayou, sitting on the organ, and we had this visiting guest deacon, which was the brother of my former pastor, Dr. Andrew Hawkins, who was a board member here at Coahoma. And his brother sang, I love the Lord, he heard my cry. And I said, wait a minute, that's it. That's what I can do my dissertation on. Because I heard that old rasp sound. I said, that comes from somewhere. And it sounds so old and so primitive. I wanted to find out, where did this come from? Where did the singing style originate from? It comes from somewhere, and I wanted to find out where. So if you fast forward maybe 3 years beyond that year, and I didn't stop giving y'all these years, some of y'all may add them up and realize how long it took me to actually sit down and write my dissertation. It was all the way in Baltimore, Maryland, at the National Baptist Convention. And here, the layman's ministry was in charge of doing the devotion service. So here I am on the main stage, sitting up high with the National Convention choir, and all of a sudden this deacon leapt up the stairs, and he had his entourage with him, a combination of deacons and other pastors. He was from South Carolina. And he sang, guess what? I love the Lord, he heard my cry. I said, oh, wait a minute. I got so excited, I kind of started scrambling, trying to find my cell phone to record. Why? And I was so excited, and I know the people beside me was wondering, what is going on with this fella here? It's because this was what my dissertation topic was on. And so I'm looking at now, wow, on the national stage of the Baptist Convention, this pastor pulled out a line hymn? Really? I'm ready to see how this is gonna unfold, because we're talking about people now from across 50 states about to sing a song without a rehearsal. And you know, I believe in rehearsal. So which leads to our next concept, the phenomenon. The phenomenon is this. This musical tradition is not written down. It's been passed down through oral tradition. Now the text of the songs, sure, you can go to a hymn book, and it's basically like the old hymn books, like the Brahmin. Some of you are Baptists remember that old green hymnal. Sure, you can find the text of the songs, but there's no way where you can find the melodies of these songs written down. Or, for that matter, who wrote them? You can't find, I Love the Lord is in the key of F minor. You start on C and then you hit F on a half note. You won't find this musical practice written down. So, again, the phenomenon, but how were so many people still able to sing this song relatively the same way? And even with the little differences, the little nuances, that makes the beauty, that adds to the beauty of the overall artwork of the line hymns. So that's what led to the basis of my study, my research. I wanted to see if my eyes and my ears were playing tricks on me in terms of how similar that everyone was able to sing these songs. So what I did through a concept called Dr. Hall purposive sampling, I selected 3 churches from 3 different counties singing the same 3 songs, and I did conducted an experiment just to analyze and just see how comparative or how these songs, line hymns were done in the church. I analyzed everything from the performance practice, what the deacon did, if they raised their hands, how the audience perceived that, and all of it, the whole 9 yards. I covered all of that. So Some of you right now are probably wondering or have questions to yourselves like, where did this tradition come from? How did it all get started? Why are the songs sang that way, where the deacon sings a line and the congregation responds, and then the deacon sings another line and the congregation responds, again, alternately? Well, in answering this question, our next slide, I would now explain to you what is lining out. By definition, lining out involves a song leader reading or chanting a textual line that is echoed by the congregation singing the lines one at a time alternately, okay? So as the demonstration you saw, one deacon, by the way, they didn't get together and practice this either, from two different churches. They came and they appeared and I told them what I wanted them to do. The deacon actually sang the line and the congregation responded, and we did this in an alternately form of fashion to wherein until the song was actually completed. So the next question would be, where did this lining out tradition come from? Well, let me read from my research here. This was recorded in the Ordinance of Westminster Assembly of Divines in London back in 1640. Listen to this quote. The ordinances recommended the adoption of the practice of English churches as explained, that the whole congregation may join herein. Everyone that can read is to have a psalm book, and all others not disabled by age or otherwise are to be exhorted to learn to read. But for the present, where many in the congregation cannot read, it is convenient that the minister or some fit person appointed by him and other officers do read the psalm line by line before the singing thereof. Even in some of our white congregations, the minister of music. Good morning. Our morning hymn is found on page 133. Will you please stand together and sing, Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. Heir of salvation, purchased, born of his spirit, washed in his. Yes. Just to show you how we do things in this day's time and not understand totally where the historical significance of where the trend comes from. Back in the day, that's how they did it. They actually, you either had an option to lining out line by line or read the entire psalm or the hymn, and then the congregation would sing it, so therefore they know where they're going with the songs. So there's multiple ways of how this tradition got formulated and got started. So here with this particular quote, again, it said this tradition, the lining out tradition, was birthed out of the fact or the reason because there was scarcity of books and there was illiteracy, high level of literacy. So therefore, people just weren't able to read, and those that were able to read kind of mattered a little less because there weren't any books to read for the most part. If you make that parallel over to America during the pre-colonial period, same thing was happening here. A lot of illiterate people. And you got to understand, this was like around the time of the American frontier way of living, to where it was basically clearing out the land, cutting down the trees, building the log cabins, right? So there was very little placed on education around this time frame. And it was more so about how we're living and how we're going to make those adjustments to get by. So in that brief little excerpt that I read, this ordinance gave instructions on how congregational music should be performed in the early English church. However, this method was only meant to be a temporary fix. Over a period of time, the practice of lining out has lost favor among white ministers, theologians, and other literate worshipers. Its usage was unsolicited, condemned, and ridiculed by many writers on early American music. People, in short, they talked about people that did this lining out practice. Once we became literate and received our education, almost like what the old people say, once you learn better, you do better. That analogy there. So just because I know you may not believe me, also recorded in my research, this was taken out of a satirical letter that was signed by the name of Geoffrey Chaucer. Listen. It is certain that this way of praising God by piecemeal, by the deacon and the people who first introduced out of condescension to ignorant people who attended the public worship, but It ought to be laid aside in New England, since there is not, I presume, 1 in 1,000 amongst us that have not been taught to read. I have but one thing more to observe, and that is that the same person who sets the tune, now he's about to talk about the deacon, and guides the congregation in singing, commonly reads the psalm, which is a task so few are capable of performing well. That they're singing in 2 and 3 staves. The congregation falls from a cheerful pitch to a downright grumbling. And then some, to relieve themselves, mount an 8 above, that's the sopranos, that's to pitch the melody up an octave higher, or at a 4th to a 5th, the little harmony you hear here and there, by means that the singing appears to be a rather confused noise, made up of reading, squeaking, and grumbling, than a decent, orderly part of God's worship. So now let me turn the conversation over to how did this tradition catch up with our African Americans? So back in mid-18th century, just as the line out tradition faded amongst white congregants, it was only the beginning and the start of something very special with African Americans. Those of us know about around the years of 1730 and 40, this was the period known as the First Great Awakening. This was the period where there was a huge revival movement sweeping throughout the European colonies. Everybody now was concerned about getting our spiritual healing, salvation, making it to heaven. And so therefore, there was actually a prolific African-American woman by the name of Eileen Southern. She wrote many articles and many books about African-American music traditions. And she wrote that around this time of the First Great Awakening, there was this huge tendency to want to make the music more livelier, pep it up a little bit, make it more interesting for our congregants. And so around this time, there was also another gentleman by the name of Isaac Watts. Thus, Dr. Watts? Isaac Watts. Isaac Watts was a nonconformist minister. He was, Dr. Towner probably viewed as a radical or a rebel, to wherein he too felt that there's some changes need to be made to how we worship and did congregational music in church. Isaac Watts was from England, and he decided, he said, the music, the text of these songs that we sing, they're not reflective of our contemporary spiritual needs. It needs to be something new, something fresh. So the new music that Isaac Watts wrote are what we call now hymns. Hymns. Isaac Watts, the father of hymns, okay? Let me take a step back just to explain something to you. So previously prior to the singing of hymns, we were singing the Psalms, literally taking scripture readings out of the Bible set to music. Just imagine how long the Psalms are, just reading in the book, and how awkward the word stress and things like that, and we're singing those long scripture readings. So the singing of Psalms is called psalmody. The singing of hymns is called hymnody. So getting back to where African Americans came onto the scene, it is the missionaries were at this time was more concerned about receiving salvation and the slaves basically not being condemned to hell in light of their beliefs, which were viewed as heathenistic. So the missionaries were zealous in their efforts to develop a platform to introduce Christianity to the enslaved. And guess what way they found to be most effective in terms of introducing Christianity to the slaves? Through music. They taught us the songs. They taught us the hymns. Here's a quote. I know you don't believe me. Here's a quote, again, in the research. And these quotes are based on the letters that was recorded in the journals of John Wesley from England. There was evidence of psalmody and hymnody being introduced to slaves. Here we go, over here in the colonies in America, around 1755, the Reverend Samuel Davis of Virginia wrote these words. I have supplied them to the utmost of my ability with books. They are exceedingly delighted with the Watts' songs. I cannot but observe that the Negroes, above all of the human species I've ever knew, have the nicest ear for music. They have a kind of ecstatic delight in psalmody, nor are there any books they so soon learn or take so much pleasure in as those used in the heavenly part of divine worship. Another letter from Davis issued a detailed account in his pursuit of equipping the slaves with psalm and hymn books. Perhaps more significantly, the following quotation reviews or reflects evidence of instances where slaves were permitted to gain access to books, mainly in this instance, psalms and hymn books. But even more critical, this inference made here actually suggests that some slaves were able to read. Listen. When the books arrived, I gave public notice after the sermon, and such Negroes as could read, and such white people as would make good use of them, to come to my house. For some time after, the poor slaves, wherever they could get an hour's of leisure, hurried away to me, and received them with all the genuine indication of passionate gratitude. All of the books were very acceptable, none more so than the psalms and the hymns, which enabled them to gratify their peculiar taste in psalmody. Sundry of them, meaning many, lodged all night in my kitchen, and sometimes when I awake at 2 and 3 in the morning, a torrent of sacred psalmody has poured into my chamber. In this exercise, some of them spent the whole entire night. Think about that. Those of us of African American community, you know exactly what he heard at 2 and 3 in the morning in his kitchen. He witnessed, firsthand witness of a worship experience by the enslaved. And I just reminded, maybe like a year right after COVID, Officer Johnson on our campus came to me and said, Towers, you know those choir members, some of your choir members over in the choir room at 2 in the morning. I said, 2 in the morning? What was they doing? He said, look, just calm down. I went inside because I saw the lights on, and man, those kids was in there singing, and they was praying, and they was just crying out to God. He said, I just left them alone. He said, no one, because I knew they weren't doing anything wrong or bad at the time. And plus, there was nothing else on the campus to do anyway on Saturday. So what I'm saying and trying to explain to you all here that the line hymns, the texts were introduced to the slaves, okay? And what we did, we took those texts, those lyrics, and we fused it together with the melodies, with the sounds and things that we did back in our campground meetings. All of those techniques, the slides, the bending of the pitches, the turns, the melismas, and all those things, all of that is Africa. That's Africanism. And you know, I was actually, I did a presentation for my American Choir Directors State Association in the University of Southern Mississippi this past September, and I told the audience, I said, yes, true, we came from Africa over on the ships, but we didn't come alone. Mother Africa came along for that ride as well. So those intrinsic values, all those qualities, those stylistic tendencies of how we sound, how the rasp is, all of that, if you trace and find and research music of West African cultures, you will find it there. The research showed that the slaves caught on to this practice so fast, so quickly. Why? It's because it reminded them of something they already knew in the motherland. The call and response is from Africa. When you research that music tradition, that's one of the older music traditions that's documented, the call and response pattern. It's all in the African drumming. When you had the call drum, the call, and then the response. Even in our spirituals, have you got good religion? Certainly, Lord. Have you got good religion? Certainly, Lord. Have you got good religion? Certainly, Lord. Certainly, Lord. Do you love everybody? Certainly, Lord. Do you love everybody? Certainly, Lord. Do you love everybody? certainly, Lord. Certainly, 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 Lord. Is your name on the roll? Certainly, Lord. Is your name on the roll? Certainly, Lord. Is your name on the roll? Certainly, Lord. Certainly, 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 Lord. Miller Stadium, right down the street here. Thursday night, 6:30 p.m. Our Majorette captain stands so beautifully here, and she do her routine. And she go back here, and then the rest of the girls stand up and they do their thing, right? Then it comes back to her, she do something else. Then they come back, the call and the what? The response. It's all through everything that it is that we do. So as the principal researcher, I feel obligated to share with you that, number one, Isaac Watts was not a doctor. Why do we call that practice Dr. Watts? I can theorize just a little bit. Those members of African American communities, we have a great deal of respect for someone or view them as a authoritarian in their subject matter. What's up, Doc? Good job, Doc. But I also can look at it from another angle, to wherein these songs, these Dr. Watt hymns were more like a spiritual healing to the people, to our race, the people that have gone through and endured so much. There's a quote from Mrs. Phillips here that says, we just went through what we went through. And those songs got us over. So, but Isaac Watts at the time was the great hymn writer. Some of his hymns were, the book of hymns that he published were some of the first books that was published here over in America. So we attributed that practice, that tradition of singing to Isaac Watts, which was one of the great hymn writers of that time. And to be honest, actually, I Love the Lord was written by Isaac Watts, but very few other hymns that we sing in this tradition was actually written by Isaac Watts. For matter of fact, Must Jesus Bear the Cross was written by Thomas Shepard. Father, I Stretch My Hand to Thee was written by Charles Wesley. So, as I bring this to a close, and I do want y'all to hear just some brief expressions from some of my interviewees. They're going to come to you in their own way and just say something very brief. I would just like to say, it's not my goal as the researcher to encourage or tell you that you must sing these songs in your church every Sunday. Teach it to the young people, do this and do this and do. That's not my goal. My goal is to get you to at least appreciate something that was written, that was done by us. This is view it as our connection to our lineage, to our ancestors, to our forefathers. If you want to connect back to our grandfathers and how they did things back in the church, and when the wooden floors and it's foot stomping, it sound like you got a drum beating in the church. Just our sense of connection back to our ancestral past, and not be one of the ones that would ridicule this practice because it was something different for our community. These songs, when they were singing "I Love the Lord, He Heard My Cry," they was literally crying. They had a reason to be singing these songs. And every now and then, society has its way of humbling us and bringing us back to the old time way. Never know, sometimes when tragedy hits you in the gut, it'll force you back down onto your knees every now and then. To wherein the contemporary gospel writer songs may not be enough to bring you over with the pain, what you need. And when you hear people singing, stretch my hand to Thee, would just like to say that even in the short-lived publishing of my work, maybe like 3 years ago or so, this book has been downloaded and uploaded over almost 300 times. Wow. So this is my contribution to my poetry. And my first copy was signed by the Towner and placed in our library on our campus.